Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce all of you to our guest, Professor Danny Shaw. Danny is an academic, an activist, and he will actually be appearing at Stony Brook University Tuesday, October 22nd at 5:15 p.m. The talk will be held in Humanities 1006, and it's titled "Dissent, Democracy, and Higher Education Under Attack." So there's a few speakers. Danny is one of four. And Danny, before we get off and just to the interview and your background and stuff, could you maybe tell us a little bit about what we could expect at this talk?
Greetings, Ben, to the Stony Brook community and to all of our good people out there in Long Island and across New York City and New York State. Yeah, I'm excited to come out to Stony Brook. I was fired after 18 years as a professor at John Jay College of Criminal Justice because I took issue last year in October with the US government forking over tens of billions of dollars for war and aggression against the Palestinian people. This has never been Israel versus Hamas. This has always been the entire Western world, England, Germany, France, and the United States behind Israel. These have been attacks against the Palestinians, the Lebanese, the Yemenis, the Iraqis, and in our culture, we have been subjected to this in big demonization campaign of these populations. So we're going to have a powwow. We're going to have a conference there at Stony Brook because myself and other professors and educators and professionals have been fired over the past year. And interestingly, my lawyer, Jonathan Wallace, will be there as well. I have two cases right now against John Jay College as well as against the U.S. government because I was also held, detained, and interrogated by the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security just because I have traveled internationally to different peace conferences. And the moment that peace becomes a crime, Ben, I think is a severe indictment of what has happened to our freedom of speech rights in this country. And for all of those listening out there, it's not that we have to agree on every political point, but I think we can all agree, whatever side of the political spectrum we come from, we have the right to articulate our views, and our First Amendment rights are under attack right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, there was a time where it felt like it didn't matter where you landed on the political spectrum, but most people could pretty much agree that, you know, everybody's entitled to their opinion. Everybody should have the right to be able to at least air their opinion, and open discourse and open dialogue are a good thing. And it feels like it really is. We're in an era where those rights are being curtailed right before our eyes.
Oh yeah, really under the nose of the American people. We have such a rich history of our First Amendment rights, our Second Amendment rights, and it's a time for everybody to stand up. The FBI and others have been raiding homes in New York State and other places when they hear of this or that individual or family having what they deem too many guns. They're cracking down on the rights of the American people to form militias. So many of our constitutional rights are under attack, and the absolute hypocrisy when we hear from CNN or the New York Times or Fox News or from Facebook or Instagram that this is the country of freedoms and everything that our foremothers and forefathers fought for. But the moment that we can critique, and I was fired, my critiques weren't even in the classroom. They were just off of X or Twitter and other social media venues. And I think this is an indictment of the entire political system. We have seen the all-out attacks on former President Donald Trump, who might just be the next president in the course of the next few weeks. All of these court cases and stuff. And this is by no means a defense of Donald Trump as an individual or of his program, which I would take issue with so many different things. But if he has this base and this popularity and there's this MAGA movement, really what the Democrats and the liberal power structure are trying to do is take him out before the election. We've seen two high profile assassination attempts against Trump. We've seen all of these court cases. And I don't think Trump is innocent. I'm sure he's guilty of many of these crimes and worse crimes, but that's not the point. The point is how selective, how they politicize this or that court case, as if somehow Biden or Kamala or Bill Clinton or Obama, none of these politicians are innocent by any stretch of the imagination. So an attack on anyone's free speech rights are an attack on all of our free speech rights. So how do we unite more people? This is the conversation that we're going to have at Stony Brook. I'm excited to head out there from the Bronx and to make common cause with so many students and professors and community members who I think have a lot to contribute to this discussion.
Definitely, yeah. I'm not sure how familiar you are with some of the student groups active on our campus, but there were a number of demonstrations last spring semester. Really around April was when it felt like things were heating up, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was April was actually when you were initially fired from John Jay. Could you? You already sort of spoke on that a little bit, but if you could expand on that whole thing, because it just sounds crazy to me. I mean, based on what you've said already, it, it was a response to things and some of your efforts and activism online that got you into hot water and eventually led to you being let go. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll walk you through the entire timeline, which really begins in the 1990s when my mother and this entire movement educated me on uh, Palestine in a 76-year Palestinian struggle against genocide. The genocide did not start last October. It goes back 76 long colonial years to 1948, the year that the British and the US government invented or created Israel. That's the very history that they're trying to stamp out and censor. They don't want the American people to know the true history. So when I saw the events of October 7th and in the aftermath, it was very clear to me that Netanyahu and the Israelis, with their backers in Washington and in Brussels and in Berlin, London, Paris, they were going to go for the kill, that is the genocidal kill. They saw the opportunity to exterminate all the Gazans. So I did what I think any red-blooded American would do. I spoke out. I used, at the time I was actually reaching millions and millions of people on Twitter. So that was one of the first things that they did. They cut my Twitter. They shadow banned me. They delisted me. They deboosted me. They came after me on other social media. And then I was doxxed. Doxing is when they take your picture and your family's information and personal info, address, and where I teach and my class schedule. And they put that out there everywhere for millions and millions of people to see. They labeled me, this is their blueprint, so they can try to shut you up. They don't go to any of the actual debate about this. I can't call it a war, I could call it a genocidal war. But what they do is they try to stifle all debate and they just say, well, you hate Jewish people and you're a Nazi and you're a skinhead. And they labeled me all of these things. And the John Jay administration here on 59th Street in Manhattan started to receive all of these robo calls every day, hundreds of calls that I was an anti-Semite, that I hated Jewish people, all of this rhetoric. And then they threatened to cut funding, and they threatened what's called the Title VI civil rights investigation into the school because they were alleging that I was a threat to all students' civil rights because of my peaceful views. They couldn't fire me back then. I still was on contract. And after 18 years, they were able to fire me the week of April. Then I was at a peace conference in London. I was doing work in Athens, Greece, and then I was in Southeast Asia and East Timor, Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And when I returned back to the U.S., the FBI detained me. They confiscated my phone, my passport, everything I had. They denied me the right to call my lawyer. They denied me the right to any phone call. And the FBI did everything to intimidate me. So it's been a heck of a year. Of course, my only regret, and I think the regret of so many, is that we could not do more. We could not reach more people. The censorship, for anyone else who's out there, my full sympathy and solidarity. I'm not the only one who's been censored, but it's very stultifying. It's very it's dispiriting, it's demoralizing, because we want to be able to use our platforms, our voices, our pens, and when they limit that and set perimeters, it's the spirit of Joseph McCarthy, the infamous senator during the Cold War. The McCarthyite hearings, that you're not American if you believe this and that. But I think the greatness of America is the different opinions that we can have, and we shouldn't get caught up in hating one another for this or that misunderstanding. So I hope everyone listening, even if they don't agree with every point that I'm raising, can understand how sacred it is to support our constitutional rights.
Yeah, I would hope so as well. I mean, it's really not a political issue, the constitutional rights of every American. And that's why, as I identify as a Marxist Leninist, and I say so loudly and proudly every 2 weeks on this station, and sometimes people are a little confused about why I invoke the founding fathers and the Constitution and all that stuff. And, you know, it's not really complicated. Those are our rights as Americans, and when those rights are infringed upon, it's the duty of every American to speak out against that, in my view. And that's why it's so crazy to me that conservatives and conservative groups, which I would say one of their core issues is freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and you hear many conservative commentators talking about, oh, this person's a snowflake because they don't like, offensive humor or something like that. And even Elon Musk's rise after purchasing Twitter, his rise in the social media world as this figure of protector of vanguard or a protector of free speech, and that X would be the vanguard of free speech in the social media space. You see this very bizarre urge, like quick reflexive urge to shut down like dissent regarding this conflict. And I do want to get your thoughts on something that I thought was a very disturbing chapter in this whole saga, which was the doxing trucks. So to anyone in the audience who's not familiar, there were actual trucks that drove around, the university campuses of Harvard, Columbia, U of Penn, with the faces and names of protesters on them as a means of encouraging harassment and intimidation. And it just, what you were talking about, Danny, made me reflect upon this. And it's almost like, where they can't, because of our constitutional rights, they can't tell you to stop talking by violent force, but they're going to use any means necessary to try and suppress, your free speech. And it's really kind of disturbing. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that a little bit.
Yeah, we had a march for the 1 year anniversary, really the 76th anniversary of the colonial genocide on Monday, and we had to cancel going to Times Square. We had to cancel, ironically, going past John Jay College, my place of employment for almost 2 decades because we had so many death threats from the Zionists, from the pro-war, pro-genocide forces. Yeah, we're talking about forces that have millions and millions and billions of dollars. They rent these trucks. The most high profile doxing was of Harvard students and Columbia students. They certainly don't want the quote unquote cream of the crop, these Ivy League students who are many of whom are paying $80,000 per year for their education if they're not scholarship students. I mean, imagine trying to ruin a college student's career because they want peace. I mean, it's ridiculous. Being doxxed means that they subject you to horrific gossip campaigns and lies. I've had all these different doxing campaigns and articles published about me where they try to frame me as some type of raving lunatic who's just out here hating, innocent people. Nothing could be further from the truth. Every word I've ever uttered in my 3 active decades of defending the Palestinian right to dignity and life and the pursuit of happiness, just like the rest of us. It never came from any place of hatred. The hatred is hatred of oppression and colonialism and inequality. So doxing is their tried and true tactic to shut us up. It's extremely anti-democratic. It goes against everything that our forefathers fought for with the American Revolution. And we see that doxing coming from other quarters. It can also come from the liberal left if they don't like our views on gender identity politics or whatever example we want to give. And that stifles debate. And our children, I have a 22-year-old son and a 17-year-old son. I want their generation not to look at a social media that is one-sided and only promotes entertainment and alienation. We want young people to be able to critically engage in these debates. And every day, I think that is completely curtailed, and the doxing trucks were a part of that. Governor Kathy Hochul has been trying to pass laws that no one can wear a mask anymore at marches or protests. But if you have all these drones and helicopters above us, you can't expect some 17-year-old high school student or some public employee of the Department of Education, for example. They're going to be afraid and intimidated. So really, they're saying that we don't have freedom of expression rights or freedom of assembly rights. So I think it's extremely worrisome, man.
Absolutely, and and so you're clear, and so the audience is clear as well. In Nassau County on Long Island, they actually did pass a law banning face masks in public. And, initially on the surface, a lot of the arguments about that were, well, this is to stop violent crime and, so on and so forth. But I actually attended the meeting at the Nassau County Legislature where they were debating that very bill. And it was just dozens and dozens of Israel flags. And it was very obvious they were doing that as a means to try and suppress the protests. And they were proud of it. In fact, there was a New York State Senator, Steve Rhodes, who went up to speak in support of the bill, who said that the actions at Columbia, the protests, were just as horrible as the events as October 7th. So it's just the language on the other side is terrifying to me. It's terrifying and
Oh,
insane.
it's so out of it. It's they don't have their feet on the ground. I mean, look, if there is some type of debate about what's actually happening in Palestine and Lebanon, every Israeli should be disarmed and should walk the length of Gaza, which is roughly half the size of New York City, basically walking the length of Brooklyn into Manhattan. Gaza is tiny. And if any Israeli or any American or European walked that gauntlet, they would never be the same. They would have the most severe PTSD from just seeing what it means to destroy every single human beings, 2.4 million human beings, refugees, people who had already been stripped of their land, of their homes since 1948. And now this is the second, the third, the fourth time they've been displaced. The population of Gaza now, the total deaths, according to the Lancet medical outlet, is now in the range of some 175,000 to 200,000. I do not think that that 41,000 statistic is sincere or honest in terms of the total deaths. And yeah, well, these politicians, they're corrupt as can be. They answer to their paymasters. Where's all the money coming from? That's how they were able to force me out of my job, because the college president, Carol, um, geez, I'm drawing a blank on the woman who fired me, Carol Mason. She said straight up she didn't think I was in any way an anti-Semite, but she's going to protect the hundreds of millions of dollars that flow to a university that pay for her salary and others. They had no interest in interviewing me. I mean, if there was truly a Nazi or an anti Semitic professor for the last 2 decades, that would certainly seem like a big deal, that they would want to interview that human being and hear his perspective to see if indeed he was a Nazi. Nothing like that happened. They just got rid of me. She only had to ever look in my eyes because I went to a town hall. There was a town hall where dozens of students and professors came to ask, well, who's next? If they can fire Professor Shaw, who's never had a complaint from a student, and this is what's going to play out in the courts. You know, this is a big First Amendment case, and that's what the panel is going to be about in Stony Brook on October um, 22nd. So I think it's a telling time. You hear Lindsey Graham as how many Americans are displaced, and these hurricanes are more and more frightful nightmares. You know, every year, usually around this time, as the fall hits, and Lindsey Graham goes on Fox News and he's talking about poor Israel. Well, we taxpayers have sent more than $400 billion to Israel. And if you begin to measure how much that is, the average Israeli has received far more in support economically and militarily from our tax dollars than has any child in the United States. So for Lindsey Graham to say that we need to send more of our money to Israel, I just hope that the audience can look deeper into that, because truthfully, what is Israel? This has nothing to do with religion. This has everything to do with colonialism. Israel is an extension of Western capitalist interests in the Middle East. The Middle East is one of the richest areas of the world, like South America, like China, like Russia, like the United States itself. It's replete with incredible resources. So they have used Israel for 76 years in the aftermath of World War I to control the entire region. Just in the past 24 hours, Israel has bombed Iraq, bomb Syria. They're threatening to bomb Iran again. They bomb Palestine every day. They bomb Lebanon. And I just hope that free minded people out there can question, well, what right does this Western supremacist country parked smack dab in the middle of the Middle East have to terrorize 500 million people, which is the population of the quote unquote Arab world or the Middle East?
Yeah, and I actually kind of want to get into that just a little bit because, I think everybody out there, regardless of what side they're on in this conflict, you know, um, everybody's heard some pretty routine arguments from, you know, the opposition, as it were. And one of the routine arguments you hear in support of Israel is that, well, Israel is surrounded by enemies. They're surrounded by hostile entities. Their very existence is at stake here. And, one piece of evidence for that is, the atrocities that occurred on October 7th. So, what do you, Danny, have to say in response to people who make that argument that, well, Israel is just defending itself?
Yeah, nothing could be further from the truth. We have a populace that's been severely brainwashed and lied to. I'd be curious what percentage of the audience out there listening right now has studied any Palestinian history. I mean, why was Israel just created in 1948? Uh, where did the original occupiers or occupants of Israel come from? They came from Poland and Eastern Europe and Germany, of course, fleeing the pogroms, fleeing the Holocaust, fleeing the worst crimes of the 20th century, but none of those crimes were carried out by Arab people. In fact, the Arabs were also the victims and the survivors of Western colonial crimes. So to now see some of the very descendants of Auschwitz and the descendants of Sachsenhausen now carrying out this level of genocidal violence against who I see as the true ancestors, the true spiritual ancestors of Treblinka and the other death camps and concentration camps are the Palestinians. They are the families, and half of Gaza is those who are still alive are under 14 and 13 years of age. How can you call a child a terrorist? Ben, this goes right to Hollywood. It goes to the media, and we have to ask ourselves, well, who own all of these outlets, and why do they stand in solidarity with this death march, with this genocidal colonial project? And those are the very forces that cut down hypocritically on our free speech rights, like the Elon Musks and like the Hollywood directors and the billionaires across the board. They have been complicit for decades because what Hollywood did, in Netflix and HBO all the way down the line. For decades now, whenever we see an Arab character introduced, the Arab character is almost always either a refugee or a terrorist, or they're violent against women. So they've given us these racist portraits and caricatures. So psychologically, they've prepared the ground for this vilification, this demonization of the native people of the Middle East. I mean, imagine every day all of these bombs dropping in Lebanon. How would we like it if we were in Nassau County and all these bombs were dropped on us? Forget about who drops the bombs. Do people realize that that destroys your water supply? So Palestinians don't have a right to water. The Israelis, way before October 7th, controlled the water supply of Gaza. Would anyone in Long Island ever stand for a foreign power controlling your right to water, your right to work, your right to food? So we're willing to have any good faith debates anywhere and everywhere these debates are necessary. But every time we try to have these honest conversations, they cut us off, they threaten us, they dox us. They don't want debates because they know that the truth lies with the Palestinian people. And that's why they go to such great lengths to censor everything. Hundreds of thousands of our accounts have been censored on TikTok, on Twitter, and then Elon Musk comes out that he's the free speech platform. I mean, it couldn't be more hypocritical and disgusting, man.
Yeah, I mean, X and the Elon Musk era has proven to be just as censorious as the prior era, just with a different ideological bend. But I wanted your take also on how this all comes out in the U.S. political system, because it's clear to anybody who pays attention for 5 seconds that Donald Trump is a staunch supporter of Israel, close ally, more or less, of Netanyahu, is willing to basically give Israel whatever it wants. Whereas, Kamala Harris appears to be a little bit more critical on the surface, but I don't know. For me personally, I don't feel all that optimistic about a Kamala Harris presidency and how that's going to impact this region or this conflict, just based on her performance as vice president. So, what do you say? Do you think there's any hope in a Kamala Harris presidency to bring peace to this Middle East, to the Middle East, to find some sort of ceasefire resolution, or do you think that's more or less like a pipe dream?
Oh, completely a pipe dream. Whoever wins on November 5th, the American people lose, people of the world lose. These politicians are bought off, they're corrupt, they're morally bankrupt. I think Trump is the wolf. Kamala tries to be a sheep. People get caught up in her disposition, in her smiling, dancing, and then they introduce this soft-spoken kind of guy from Minnesota, Governor Tim Walz, and try to tell us that he's the nicest guy on earth. This is so superficial. The true legacy, the true essence of liberalism is being plastic, being fake, not getting to the core, to the roots of these issues. All the liberals out there who have not taken a stand in defense of life. How would you like it if your people in your community and your nation was under attack and you were being exterminated? You wouldn't want other people to stand up for you. This is certainly a Holocaust-esque moment for humanity. One of the most powerful signs, and I have a book called "This Is Genocide" about this entire topic, and I lead with that very image. It's a sign that I marched with at a protest, and many people had, and it said, "Well, if you ever wondered what you would have done during slavery and what you would have done during the Holocaust, just look in the mirror. This is exactly what you would have done." So many people have remained quiet; they've done nothing, and now we have what's called the Trump derangement syndrome. And I want to give a concrete example to define this, because the liberals out there often say, well, I have no illusions. It's not that I think Joe Biden, Kamala, and these characters are trustworthy, but Trump is just so bad in this Project 2025. Well, what about Project 2024? What about Project Genocide? What about Project Censorship? And it's been the Dems who've been leading the censorship charge. And I lived in Haiti before. I lived in the Dominican Republic. I lived in Cuba. I've traveled to some 86 countries in the world to do my research as a sociologist, as an ethnographer. And the Haitians have a saying that the Democrats and the Republicans represent the two wings of the same vulture, which seeks to devour the Middle East, the Caribbean, as well as our interests here at home, because all this money that the Republicans and Democrats send off for more genocide, for more humiliation. I mean, imagine what we could do right here for us, for those affected by the storm that's impacted 6 states in the South and now more. Um, I'll give a practical example, and then the audience can decide who is more dangerous. So Trump says these absurd things and dog whistles and repeats. The Haitians are coming up, and I'll just say what's up to all my Haitian people up there. Nap saliye, nap voyongo, just to speak in my third language that I picked up from the Haitian people who taught me so much. And just like they have stereotyped and stigmatized the Palestinian people, they've stigmatized the Palestinians of the Caribbean, Haitian people. So there you have Trump at the pulpit of lies, hundreds of millions of immigrants are coming and they're going to eat your little doggy and they're going to eat your little kitten. I mean, it's beyond the pale. It's such a conspiracy theory. It's way out there. And then you have Kamala Harris there, who's looking at him and saying that he's a deplorable and he's a liar, which is true. But as she says that, with all of her typical hypocrisy, it's the Biden and Harris administration who continue to employ and pay for, with our tax dollars, Kenyan troops and other foreign troops from the Caribbean and Africa to occupy Haiti, to militarily impose another dictatorship on Haiti. This is the fourth time that the United States occupies Haiti in the past 100 years. So again, Kamala, with that fake dance and fake smile, condemning Trump as she's the one who's one of the architects of the military invasion and occupation of Haiti for the fourth time in 100 years. So I ask the audience, not who is the lesser of two evils, who is the more effective of two evils, and share this with your classmates and your coworkers and your neighbors and your family, because That's the question that everyone should ask themselves when they step into the voting booths on November 5th, or if they're boycotting the vote, or if they're voting for a Jill Stein, a Dr. Cornel West. Certainly, any vote should be a vote of boycott, a vote of protest, and a vote of consciousness.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I've always disagreed, as in a quick aside, with that line of argumentation that people should just vote. Like, just vote, just vote, just vote. You have to. And it's like, no, not voting is a form of speech as well, right? Like, you shouldn't be expected to go out and endorse a system that you don't feel like anybody in that system represents your interests. And, I kind of want to go back to the discussion about the universities real quick because, again, this will, of course, air on university radio airwaves. You're going to be speaking at Stony Brook University, and you are a former academic. But I happen to find, and this might get me in a teeny bit of trouble, I hope not, but I happen to find that there's a parallel between the way universities operate and the way that the American political system operates. And the similarity that I see is that the administrations at these universities often don't do what the students want them to, or they don't act in the interests of the students. I would say that's the more accurate way to put it. And the similarity between that and our government is that the federal government often doesn't act with the based on the interests of the citizenry. And so, I just want to get your thoughts on that. Like, as someone who was in academia for multiple decades, do you see the same misalignment there between what the university, administration wants and what's best for the students?
Yeah, I do. I'm an alumni of Columbia University. I was a scholarship student and a basketball player and then a boxer. I was at Columbia undergrad from 96 to 2000, and then I was back there at graduate school at the School of International and Public Affairs in 2004 to 6. So when the Columbia students very creatively and very brazenly, bravely stood up, it was a clarion call for so many of us as alumni, as professors. I wanted to be out there. And you have all these students standing up, but the administration never respected our demands. They sicked the NYPD to call in the NYPD on a bunch of college students, and I'm glad I was there. I mean, these students, many of them are the age of my sons, but I wanted to be camped out, and I got arrested with the students because it was an act of solidarity, and I can't even begin to imagine, Ben, how much this has impacted the past year plus of genocide, how it's impacted the health, the mental health of so many of us, myself included, how many genocidal nights of insomnia. So to camp out for me was a responsibility. It was a great honor, and I felt the inner peace just being around other people who shared the same concerns as I. Um, these universities set up like this or that student government. That stuff is purely hypocritical. It's just designed to give the guys the outward appearance um, that there's going to be change. But when is there ever uh, change? And same with this government. 333 million Americans, so much talent and diversity of thought and experiences in this country. In the political spectrum, all of the money that's out there in technology and artificial intelligence, and all they can come up with is Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, and then they call that democracy. The entire world, even if us Americans cannot see clearly. I just got back from Southeast Asia and across Malaysia, across Indonesia, across I was in Japan as well. The world is in full solidarity with the Palestinian people. Many of those governments will not do business with Israel because they know Israel is colonialism. They know Israel is genocide. And they know that Israel is not alone. Israel could not do any of this if it were not for the German government, if it were not for the US government, first and foremost. And how many people out there are afraid to ask that question? It never dawned on anyone that this is colonialism, the same way that the Western powers, the European countries, carved up the world in 1888 with the Berlin Conference and the scramble for Africa. How has anything changed? Who controls East Africa today? Who controls Southeast Asia? How come they tell us every day, Ben, that Cuba is bad and Venezuela is bad and Zimbabwe is bad and China and Russia? One third of humanity wakes up under US and European sanctions every day, precisely because the US, not the people, we always have to differentiate between the US people and the US ruling class or the US government, but they don't want to see any shred of dignity or independence out there. That's why we're told every day the Iranians are the enemy and the Russians are the enemy. The U.S. Military industrial complex needs boogeymen. They need fake enemies like the human lungs need oxygen to keep going. That is their justification for their raison d'etre, for their being, and swallowing up how many hundreds of billions of dollars that we need to invest in our futures, in our children, in our children's futures. There's less jobs every day. The automation, the AI, our enemies are on Wall Street and in the Pentagon, and that's what we have to wake up to.
Yep. Well, it's not a very pleasant thought, but it is true. I think that the system that's currently in place is not really equipped to handle the problems that we're going to be dealing with in the next coming decades. So, with that, I think we should probably wrap it up. This was a great discussion. Once again, appearing Tuesday, October 22nd, 5:15 p.m., Humanities 1006. Our guest here, Danny Shaw, is going to be speaking at a lecture titled Dissent, Democracy, and Higher Education Under Attack. Danny, any last words for the audience here?
Yeah, keep going, keep fighting for Palestine, for life, for dignity. Whether you're a podcaster or an artist or a dancer, use your social media, use your platforms. Don't stop marching. Don't stop taking the streets. Before November 5th, have these conversations, share these rich discussions. Follow, the doxxed and censored and fired professors. I'm at Prof, as in Professor Prof. Danny Shaw. Support us. We're under fire, but like so many heroes who came before us, we can't stay quiet in the face of so much injustice. We have to continue to see Palestine as our moral compass. That was the slogan of these brave Columbia students. And, I couldn't be more proud to stand with these students. And I remember the protests at Stony Brook, which were also very valiant. So I look forward to seeing many of you on October 22nd so we can continue to chop it up and do everything that we can so that when our grandchildren look back and tell the true history, a people's history in the spirit of Howard Zinn and Noam Chomsky and so many other people's historians, that we did everything we could to stop this absolute madness of the Israeli colonial project, this Western capitalist project that continues to devour the land and lives of the historic Palestinian nation.
Excellent. Thank you, Danny. Thank you so much for the time.